This video is going to be pretty controversial, and judo practitioners are going to be really mad at it. But I mean, the good news is, like, what are they going to do? Use judo on me? I think I'm pretty safe.
Note, the ideas expressed in this video are the sole views of its author. They do not necessarily represent the beliefs of the gym, the instructors, or the owner, and the contents of this video are not co-sponsored by any other person or organization. This is America, I'll say what I want, and you can leave everyone else out of it. Watch responsibly.
As you might have guessed from the title of this video, I think judo kind of sucks. It's not Aikido level bad, but amongst the combat sports talked about in MMA circles, it's clearly the most overrated. Now, I don't want to be too hard on judo because the community is nice enough, and judo gave us basically every widespread innovation in martial arts. The belt system, the gi, the existence of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and millions of worldwide martial artists that are all there because of judo. Its historical contributions are important, but as a fighting system, in the modern day, when you compare it to all the other options out there, judo sucks. And that's true for its crossover to other combat sports and for self-defense encounters. I'll start with why judo fails in MMA, and then talk about why it fails on the streets. You know, originally I had written the line, why it sucks on the streets, and I immediately realized that that's a really bad turn of phrase to use on the internet. Judo doesn't suck on the street, because that's your mom's job! Ah! So just like every martial art, judo has been shaped by the incentives of its rule set. Judo scores throws based on the speed, power, and position of the initial landing. However, it seems to give no regard to how people roll or scramble after that landing, because the competitors typically stand back up and reset. From an MMA or wrestling perspective, this can lead to some pretty bizarre outcomes. This throw was 10 points for the guy in the white gi, even though he ended up on the bottom. This was another point for white. In MMA, that would have counted as a takedown for the other guy. And here is the throw that won Japan a gold medal, despite not holding or controlling his opponent in any way and immediately initiating a scramble. Because a lot of modern judo scores are given based on the instant someone hits the mat and nothing that happens after that, it encourages the kind of high-risk attacks that can cause you to lose a scramble and end up on the bottom. In most combat sports, that's bad news, but in judo, you just get to stand up and try again. Which means judo practitioners have no incentive to learn scrambling or ground control, two things that are often deciding factors in actual fights. When you have to do something after the takedown, like get a submission or hit them, throwing someone like a judo practitioner is a whole lot of risk for not a lot of reward. While some judo throws barely count as takedowns, you also have instances that fall on the opposite end of the spectrum, such as people doing involuntary cartwheels and getting back mounted without any points being awarded because they got their elbows on the mat? Sure, okay. When you put judo throws into the context of an actual fight, or even other grappling arts, you realize that the way judo practitioners fight and decide scores doesn't make any sense. In addition, judo relies heavily on the gi to establish grips, which absolutely no one wears outside of the context of specific grappling arts. This is a problem for Brazilian jiu-jitsu as well, but BJJ also has a strong no-gi scene and a myriad of moves that don't rely on the gi at all. Judo, on the other hand, requires gi grips for most of its signature moves. Without it, there are like 5 hip throws in existence, and none of them are very good. While judo is often promoted as having good takedowns and good ground grappling, it's much worse than its competitors at both of those things. The rule set in judo doesn't allow enough time on the ground to advance position or work submissions. As a result, it lacks the classic Brazilian jiu-jitsu ability of being able to flow quickly from one submission to another. At most, it rewards holding your opponent still for 10 to 20 seconds, which most other combat sports call stalling. And the only joint submissions allowed in judo are attacks to the elbow, meaning that Ronda Rousey was good at arm bars because it was one of the only things she was allowed to do. The few judokas with genuinely good submissions usually end up being one-trick ponies with a ground game as deep as a puddle. A pure judo practitioner is mostly lost and confused once a fight spends any amount of time on the ground, because it's something modern judo just doesn't do. They can't flow through positions, set traps, or chain attacks together. Not because they're stupid, but because their rule set doesn't give them the freedom to ever practice it. To drive this point home, here's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition featuring an actual BJJ white belt with no other experience and another alleged white belt who also happens to have a 4th degree black belt in judo. Same weight class, similar age brackets. And the BJJ guy won. It was supposed to be best 2 out of 3, but they did not need the 3rd. And this goes to show that even massive differences in experience can't always make up for the fact that one of these arts teaches how to sweep, submit, transition, and chain attacks, and the other one doesn't. And sure, you can argue that judo has better takedowns than Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but so does my grandma. When it comes to reliably taking people down, judo pales in comparison to arts like wrestling. I've seen judoka claim that they teach all the same techniques that wrestling does, but that's really not true. The International Judo Federation completely banned leg grabs, like double legs and single legs, over a decade ago, and had them partially banned before that. Judo fans will tell you that the older generation of judoka learned leg grabs, but listening to what judo used to do is like listening to some withered old man going, "Back in my day, I used to be a stallion." Sure, Grandpa, let's get you to bed. Even before the ban, judo sucked at leg grabs because the rule set simply didn't reward them. Judo mainly rewards high amplitude takedowns in which you can control the orientation of your opponent's upper body, i.e. hip throws. The ultimate goal is to throw your opponent flat on their back with speed and power. While leg grabs are easily the best and most reliable way to put someone on the ground to control them, judo instead rewards the high-risk, high-amplitude throws over the more reliable, less flashy leg grabs. Even when leg grabs were allowed, they were discouraged. So even though you have a generation of judoka that learned leg grabs prior to the ban, they still sucked at them, and most of them have long since retired from competition. Meanwhile, wrestling does include all of the same no-gi throws that judo has, but they train them no-gi from the beginning. And American wrestling scores all takedowns the same. You'll notice, however, that there are relatively few hip throws in wrestling or MMA, and that's because leg grabs just work better. Freestyle wrestling even has a similar rule set bias to judo that rewards high amplitude throws more. And freestyle wrestlers still prefer leg attacks because without the gi, hip throws kind of suck, which makes the exclusion of leg grabs a glaring hole in the curriculum when trying to apply judo in other contexts. To see a good example of how judo stacks up against wrestling, look at this BJJ match between an Olympic judoka and a college wrestling champion. But before that, note that the wrestler was not a Division I champion. He competed in the NAIA, which is roughly equivalent to NCAA Division III. College sports are weird. So we have a literal Olympian against a third-tier college-level champion. That's like putting a minor league champion against a World Series team. But the wrestler still won. While the judo guy certainly had his moments, the wrestler took every single one of the takedowns and the healthy majority of control time. Put simply, in terms of reliably getting your opponent to the ground, wrestling beats judo, and it's not close. Even when we look at MMA, we see a disproportionate population of wrestlers at every level, and we see few highly ranked judo practitioners. Rick Hahn was an Olympic judoka whose attempts at a Bellator championship were repeatedly thwarted by American college wrestlers, who comprised most of his losses. Karo Parisian experienced 4 of his first 6 losses to former wrestlers, and a 5th loss to Georges St. Pierre, also known for his wrestling, which was then followed by a permanent career downturn. Dong Hyun Kim had 3 out of his 4 career losses given to him by former wrestlers, and the 4th loss to Damian Maia, a BJJ specialist. Ironically, it seems like judo practitioners in MMA can trace most of their losses to other grapplers, especially people with backgrounds in American wrestling, which seems to be Judo's natural predator. Of course, there are outliers. Two of the most successful ever fighters with Judo backgrounds are Kayla Harrison and Ronda Rousey. And that's only because A, they were Olympic medalists, and B, they're in the women's divisions, which have almost no wrestlers. And don't bother bringing up Fedor Emelianenko because he competed in Judo for only 2 years and went 12-7. His background is like 90% Sambo. In MMA, Judo gets at most 1 or 2 somewhat noteworthy people at a time, as opposed to the literal hundreds of fighters from wrestling and kickboxing backgrounds. And while many martial arts have the excuse that they're less popular so they don't have enough practitioners to make a splash in MMA, Judo is very popular worldwide.
Hey Frankie, I'm from Dagestan. Everybody love freestyle wrestling, but Judo, we talk about Dagestan, 3 million, but what about 7 billion people? They love Judo. 176 countries compete in Olympic Games. Freestyle wrestling, 54, 56.
And honestly, that popularity is the only reason anyone in MMA even talks about it, because it is, at best, a third-rate combat sport. And the people that list it as a core art of MMA are just wrong. If you want to eventually transition to MMA, apparently you'd have better results learning karate. And if you want to be good at grappling, spending 1 year in wrestling and 1 year in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a way better option than spending 2 years in Judo. But, as with every martial art that gets brutalized in MMA, Judo starts coming up with excuses. Oh, bro, MMA is on the mats, though. On the streets? I'm just throwing people on concrete. I'm hitting them with the earth. Are you wearing a jacket? That's literally exactly the same as a gi with no differences. Bro, watch this compilation of judo throws in street fights that cut out the part where the guy immediately gets back up and keeps fighting. Wow, your moves can work on drunk people with zero training? Amazing. Have you seen literally any other combat sport used in a street fight? They all work! Unless you genuinely believe that judo is somehow the only sport that has discovered gravity. And yeah, landing on concrete might end the fight, but it usually doesn't. Anyone that doesn't land directly on their head tends to get back up and keep fighting, which means you need to be able to follow them to the ground and actually do something to them. Now, you might get lucky and find an opponent that manages to always land on their head, but I've seen people with fatal wounds win street fights, so forgive me if I'm not convinced that making them fall down is a guaranteed win. If you don't have a backup plan for when your first move doesn't instantly end the fight, then you don't really have a way to win fights. You have a fantasy about fighting. Now, in response to this argument, judo people will inevitably show some video of a street fight ending with someone getting thrown into the shadow realm. But the reason you tend to see those clips online is because those are the really cool videos that people like to share, not because they're the norm. They're cool because they're outliers. Also, the entire idea of an instant win because of your beautiful hip throw is predicated on the assumption that your opponent can't fight. When you look at the way judo people throw each other, moving that fight onto concrete would often cause just as much damage to them as to their opponent. Most of the time, both judokas go down. Slamming your face on concrete doesn't magically hurt less just because you initiated the move. Wrestlers, BJJ practitioners, and MMA fighters, on the other hand, learn to use takedowns that are more likely to land them in good positions that offer control, not just score points. If you give them an opponent that can't grapple, the results are going to be even more devastating because they're not completely reliant on a gi to establish their grips. In a judoka's mind, a good throw is the end of a fight. In a wrestler's mind, it's the beginning of the fight. Tell me which one you would rather be thrown by. Now, I'm not saying that judo can't work. I'm saying that, against an untrained moron, everything works. But if two people get into a street fight, one of them knows judo, while the other has the same amount of hours in wrestling, BJJ, MMA, Sambo, Muay Thai, or a half dozen other things, the judo person is going to lose. Also, a jacket is not a gi. I hear the same excuse used by traditional BJJ people, and forgive me if I cover the microphone with this jacket, but I'm going to do my best. Anyway, if it's cold enough for me to wear a thick and sturdy winter coat, then it's cold enough for me to zip it up. There go the lapel grabs. Also, what was your plan? To only get in fights between January and February, the time of year when violent crime is the absolute lowest? I live in the American South. I wear this jacket 3 days a year. Judo isn't the worst martial art out there, but it's far from the best. It has an extremely limited ground game and a one-dimensional takedown game that practically falls apart outside of the restrictive Judo rule set. It gets crushed against other grappling styles, it gets crushed in MMA, and its legendary status on the streets is perpetuated by fictionalized hypothetical scenarios and a cherry-picked selection of flashy outliers. In terms of a proven track record of effectiveness, Judo is worse than karate and only slightly better than Taekwondo. You like takedowns? Learn wrestling. You like submissions? Learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You like winning? Learn something other than Judo.
If you want to genuinely engage with any of the ideas expressed in this video, feel free to leave a comment below. If you feel a burning desire to hurl insults at me, contact me directly by sending an email to touchgrass@judosucks.com, where your ramblings will be carefully and rigorously reviewed by my trash folder. Alternatively, send a letter postmarked to 123 Deal With It Lane with an enclosed $5 bill to compensate me for my time reading whatever incoherent ramblings your diseased little brain decided to crayon onto an innocent piece of paper. If you experience an irresistible urge to physically challenge the author of this video, meet me in the Denny's parking lot in 15 minutes. If you have a history of verbally defending Judo, consult with a doctor before watching, as your brain might not be healthy enough for content. Side effects may include crying, screaming, butthurt, and writing dumb things in my comment section. Watch responsibly.
We're good?
Yeah, when was the last time you got successfully judo thrown?
The last time I got successfully judo thrown was the last time I made a critical error in putting my hips in a horrible position. There have been many times where I just wait for them to judo throw me, because I know they're going to do it. I give them a hip throw, I wait for them to take it, and I slam them on their head. That's how I take down large people most of the time, is waiting for them to try and hip throw me, and then watching them fail, because I can't double leg them, they're too big, so they have to just make the horrible mistake of using judo.